Well, good morning. I'm Simon Wright, Assistant Director for Learning and Public Engagement here at the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're gathering, the Jagera and Turrbal peoples, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's the opening weekend, as you know, of Gerhard Richter, The Life of Images. 5 years in the making and exclusive to Brisbane and the Gallery of Modern Art, Gerhard Richter, The Life of Images is the first major Australian exhibition of Richter's work, and it features major loans from international public and private collections. This morning we are delighted to be joined by art historian, curator and the director of the Richter Archive in Dresden, Dr. Dietmar Elger. Throughout this morning's fireside chat, Dietmar will share insights into what it's like to manage the archive of one of the world's most successful and influential living artists. We're delighted that he's going to be joined in conversation by Dr. Rosemary Hawker, who is the exhibition curator of Gerhard Richter, The Life of Images, and senior lecturer in art theory in the Fine Art Department at Griffith University, our research and curatorial partner. I'd like to also acknowledge Urban Art Projects as our major partner. There will be time for questions at the end of our session this morning, and just with housekeeping, if you wouldn't mind checking your mobile phones, and if you'd like to catch up anything in the meantime, we'll be putting this onto QAGOMA TV as soon as we can. Would you please welcome our panellists, Rosemary and Dietmar. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Simon. Good morning. Thank you all for coming and being so enthusiastic in this first part of the public program for the Gerhard Richter Life of Images exhibition. I'm very thrilled to be kicking off this program with Dr. Dietmar Elger. We've had an association over quite some time, as I've travelled to the archive that he is the director of in Dresden on a number of occasions, and also met with him in his office in Cologne, which is perhaps the most beautiful office that anyone can imagine. So I think he finds it hard to leave Cologne sometime to go to Dresden. The archive is a remarkable resource for scholars of Gerhard Richter's work, and today we're going to hear much more about it, more detail about the archive. But let me first tell you a little bit more about Dr. Elger before we begin. Dr. Elger studied art history and literature at the University of Hamburg, where he completed a PhD on Kurt Schwitter's Merzbar. After graduating in the early 1980s, he worked for a short time as secretary to Gerhard Richter's studio. Since then, he's held a number of positions in museums, including the Museum of Ostwald Dortmund, and then as curator of painting and sculpture at the Sprengel Museum in Hanover, where he curated exhibitions on Richard Tuttle, Louise Lawler, Raymond Goerke, Stephen Birkenhall, Donald Judd and Andy Warhol. He prepared the very first catalogue raisonné of Gerhard Richter's work in 1986, and he's also prepared a catalogue raisonné of the work of Felix González Terés in 1997. He's been director of the Gerhard Richter Archive at the State Gallery Museum in Dresden for a number of years now, and we were delighted that he was able to travel to Brisbane to be here, not just only in his own terms as perhaps the person, the scholar in the world who knows most about Gerhard Richter's work, but also in terms of helping us with installing this exhibition and bringing a number of very key works from both the Dresden collection, Gerhard Richter's personal collection, and other significant institutions in Germany. So, good morning and welcome, Dr. Elger.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
We're going to kick off this morning talking a little bit about the work of the archive and Dr. Elger's experience in forming the archive. And then after we work through some of those ideas, we're going to throw the discussion open to the audience, and you'll have the opportunity to ask Dr. Elger questions about his work and about Gerhard Richter. But first I'm going to ask a fairly foundational question, which is, could you tell us a little bit about how the archive came to be established in the first place, and also how it comes to be in Dresden?
Okay, the second question is the most easier. So Gerhard Richter is living in Cologne, but Dresden is his birth town. So in some way he returned to his birth town after the reunification of Germany. And the story itself, why it's in Dresden, is a little bit more complicated, so I have to tell you also this. So we have the first images showing here are images from the flood in Dresden in the year 2002. And so the river Elger was going over its edges, and the state art collections were hit very hardly and were underwater, and a charity auction has been made to support the reconstruction of the Museum Albertinum, which is a collection of 19th and 20th century. And for this charity auction, Gerhard Richter donated a painting, a very large painting called Fels, that we see here. And it was sold in this charity auction and brought in about 90% of what the whole auction brought in, which was by 34 other artists also. And after this painting was sold to a private collector, this private collector contacted the museum and said, I'm willing to give this painting to you back as a permanent loan. And with this loan, the general director of the museum in Dresden, Mr. Martin Roth, who unfortunately died some weeks ago, contacted Gerhard Richter, and they agreed that not only this painting will be shown in Dresden in the near future, but also Gerhard Richter will give many more works from his personal collection, so that free spaces in the museum will be permanently hosted to Gerhard Richter. And this was shown for about 2 years before the museum closed for renovation, and then it was reopened in 2010, 5 years later. So after the exhibition spaces has been installed, I can show next image. So it looks like this. This is after the reconstruction of the work or the renovation of the building. But this is how it looks like at that time and even also now. So after they got this one loan from the private collector, who also gave other works from his private collection, Richter paintings, and Richter's own works, the general director contacted Richter and said, oh, we have this large amount of paintings now that we're showing and presenting in the collection, and we want to do something more. And we also want not only to show works, we also want to have a more scientific approach to your work. And what do you think about installing an archive in Dresden? So, and Gerhard Richter was thrilled to do that, and even so, I guess neither the director nor the artist know what it really means. But it looked like a good idea, so I have this term archive. So, and it was also a clever idea, because with the installation of the archive, it was more difficult. It was more difficult, or difficult at all, to throw away, take away the paintings again. Yeah. So the installation of the archive made something permanent.
Yes.
And
so just to clarify,
take away the loans would be much more difficult after that.
So to clarify, there are now dedicated spaces within the museum that are always showing the work of Gerhard.
We have 2 spaces since the reopening, and this was also a wish of Gerhard, that it's not that too much. So we have 2 spaces permanently donated to his paintings, and we have changing presentations also because of loans that we give to exhibitions like this one, or we have exhibitions also in that space where we have another presentation. So, but it's an untold reglement that we have 2 spaces for works by Gerhard Richter.
At all times, yeah.
And then in 2006, So Gerhard proposed me as a director for the archive because I was writing his biography some years before. And this makes it more logical, so as a biographer, to also host the archive. And he knows me already since 20 years or so. And I agreed because at the post where I was before, I was already for 17 years, and it seems to be repeating itself a little bit. And so it was the idea of doing something new. So I went to Dresden and built up this archive, which was an empty room when I arrived.
I can remember when I visited the archive for the first time, how one of the things that was apparent was that you were slowly, it was as if you were pushing the walls back to take more and more space for the archive. So it had begun in a very small office, and even as I was there, you were looking at the room next door and plotting how to get the room
already
next
have
door.
now. Yes,
Yes.
we have a second room now for storage for books and posters and things like that. So we doubled our space for the archive now.
Excellent. And in terms of the work that the archive does, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about the sorts of activities you engage in and the types of projects that you generate through the archive?
Yes, I always say we have 3 columns we are based on. So the first one is we collect nearly anything on Gerhard Richter, so like articles, catalogs, Richter catalogs, but also other catalogs and books where even if it has only one illustration sometimes. And we collect ephemera, like invitation cards, reviews, posters, other things. We have a set of porcelain that he designed.
Oh, really? I didn't.
We have a handbag that he designed, or where his design was used, I have to say. He once did a carpet, and we have a piece from this carpet also that we just recently bought, so as an example, so you can present that. So we try to get hold of nearly as much as we can, which is on and about Gerhard Richter, and this is also what I'm lucky to be here, because I can also collect here a lot of things.
Indeed.
So like the postcards, the magnet I take home, things like this.
I didn't think
Also
about your
more
interest.
important things like the catalog also.
Exhibit A.
Yes.
I hadn't really thought about some of the aspects of the ephemera that you gather together, but I also wonder whether there are times that people come to you with material that they would like to donate. And I know in an institution such as this, there's often the problem that people would like to be generous with things, but sometimes the institution's not able to accept all the gifts that come their way. Have you been in situations like that in the archive?
Only very rarely. So there was an artist who sent us his paintings and wanted us to have them because he thinks this is like a homage to Gerhard, and it was too expensive to send it back, so we still have it, which is a little bit of a problem. So you cannot destroy it, because he might come someday and is asking for it. So we have it, but we are not lucky about it. Besides of that, donations are not so much.
No.
So there sometimes are donations, but you also have to be aware, ephemera by Gerhard Richter are also collected by private collectors. Yes, so there is a market for ephemera of Gerhard Richter. Like we once bought something in auction, which was an interview, handwritten interview, where Richter did the questions and the answers, and this was very nice to see in this interview that both is the same handwriting for the questions to him and his answers to these questions. But we paid a lot of money because other people were also behind it, and we had to be tough in auction.
The market makes your job harder.
So we have to deal with the market.
Yes.
In total, ephemera is not the prices of painting, so we are lucky that we can spent 3,000, 5,000. So this interview was about 15,000 euro.
But some years ago, that would not have been an issue because the market would not have been as strong, not as much competition for that material. But I know that the archive has a considerable publication program, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about some of the publications you've done through the archive.
Yes, what we try to do is, we get away a little bit from what I first said, that we are on 3 columns. So the first one is the collection, that we collect material. The second one is that we help other people, like we help you a little bit with the exhibition. We also help other people who study on Gerhard Richter, who do research. We get a lot of requests from people, also requests and questions that we forward to the artist and then answer. Requests from the auction houses, requests from other museums. So people who asking us if the work they have is authentic Gerhard Richter work, which it's mostly not. We're also writing certificates of authenticity, where we take money for a little bit, so 400 euro for each certificate. And so we have a lot of jobs to do with communicating with others and being contacted. And the third one, and this brings us to your question, is that we have our own program of projects. So like symposium, we did symposium, we're doing the catalog raisonné, and we're doing a publication program where part of it is that we publish things that are unpublished or only published in other languages, that we publish in German then, and things like that.
And probably one thing just to clarify there is that Dietmar Elger was responsible for the first catalogue raisonné in 1986. And am I right to think that was a single volume work in 1986, the first catalogue raisonné?
Yes, this was a real catalogue raisonné, I would say, in 86, because it has information about exhibitions and literature information, and because Gerhard is doing these listings, so the image and just a short listing, which I would not call a catalogue raisonné.
But certainly it was a major contribution to scholarship at a very early time, and now you're in the position where you're about to publish a 4 volumes?
6 volumes.
Sorry,
so 4 are already out. 4 are out.
Yeah.
Just this year, the 4th one, which actually was the 2nd one in the row, and we have 2 more to go, and then there will be a 7th volume that will have all these literature exhibition information, large biography, and all the paintings again, or all the works again in small post-stamp size images, like an overview. So this would be followed as a 7th volume at the end. So what we see here is something we bought. It's the draft for a catalogue Gerhard Richter and Polke did in 1966 for a gallery exhibition in Hanover. And we bought the original and then published this original version in a small book that we did, together with the pages of the printed version. So you can compare the printed version and the handmade version. So this is something that either became, in one way, part of the archive as a very early, very important document, and we made a book project out of it. And we showed it in an exhibition.
And was that, with a project like that, does Gerhard Richter himself have input to it, or is that something that you generate yourself without consultation with him?
We would not do this without asking him and ask for his permission to do this. Yeah. So the publication project. And also, there are some publications we did that came from him. So he said, I have this or that, or there's this text in English, I want to read it in German, can you publish it in German? Yes, so sometimes we fulfill the wish of the artist with these publications. He
says that he doesn't read art history, art theory articles about his work, but obviously that's not entirely true.
Not entirely.
No. He enjoys reading them, but he doesn't necessarily want to talk about his work in that context, is my impression. And in terms of the activities that you undertake through the archive, can you explain a little bit about the relationship that you have with the artist studio and the artist himself, and the extent to which that shapes the work of the archive? Obviously, we've heard a little bit about that already, but the extent to which you are in touch with the studio and in touch with the artist, and how much that's part of the daily work or the weekly work of the archive.
So I'm living more in Cologne than in Dresden, which for the works it's nearly no problem, because with a computer communication and internet, and so it's quite easy to work with assistants in Dresden, even when you are not there. So, and I'm in Cologne because Gerhard Richter is in Cologne. I see him quite often, and I have an office in his former studio. So I go to my office there instead of the archive, or the office is part of the archive. And we're working very closely together. And at the beginning, there was a question from other people that said, "Oh, what's the sense of an archive if you have still a working studio?" Yeah, and so we split it between the studio is taking care of the projects that are on the run and actual projects, and so we are taking care of everything that is history in some way. Yes, so older projects, requests, or so, and it works quite good. We also take some work over from the archive. We're taking care of things that from the studio that they could not do that well as we can do, because we have some extra information. So they send things over to us that we do. So it works very well, and I'm there. Not regularly, but surely in like 1 week, once a week or so. And then I speak to him. I mostly have questions that I have to ask him, or I just speak to the secretary, or I collect catalogs from the studio, or I have to research something at the studio that we do not have, like photographic material or other things. And so it's close, the connection. I can always come. I don't have to call. I call, but I don't have to call. But I think it's better to call before I come. So, and I never get a rejection that I cannot come. But it's my nightmare, but I also can't say that. My nightmare is that once I stand in front of the door to the studio, I ring the bell, and they say, "Go away, we do not want to see you." This is my nightmare now for 12 years.
Oh, really? I can't imagine that ever happening.
Yeah, so I'm quite open now with my feelings.
And in recent years, I can imagine that you have had more material come from the studio into the archive. Would that be right?
Yes, so we scan a lot of material also. We scan photographic material, the negative archive. We also scanned letters, but there is also a whole period that it's gone away because Richter threw it away. Yes, so we have the early letters to the studio, from the studio to the galleries. We have communication between the studio and the galleries from the late 80s on, and we have scanned it till 2000, 2002 or so, because I do not want it to have it the actual
physical objects.
The physical things, and sometimes it's better to read when you have scanned it than the actual thing. And I have access to the originals, so I do not actually need it. If I want to have it, like for a presentation, to put in some papers or so, then we can always have it. But usually we have this. And it's mostly for our own work, with the catalog resume, and to research things when we get requests from the auction houses or from galleries. If this work has been sold for a specific gallery or so, we can look that up. It's not so much for visitors.
No.
So it's doesn't make sense so much for visitors, and we also hesitate a little bit to give it to them because it always has prizes and things like that.
And do you have many visitors to the archive?
Well, we're happy with what we have, I would say. Yes, so we're all sitting in one room. We have this other room, which is a storage room only. We're all sitting in one room, and when a visitor is there, he is sitting with us, and he hears everything we say. So if I have a phone call with somebody, and I hang up and say, "Oh, I hate this asshole," then the visitor also hears this, and you never know who else he knows.
But this is the beauty of having a monolingual Australian come to visit, because you hear tone of voice and you think that something very exciting must be happening and something perhaps along those lines might be being said, but you've actually got no clue. So perhaps you're allowed to stay a little longer because of that. I know certainly when I've visited the archive, I've always felt that you and the staff are incredibly generous with your time and very patient and helpful. Even from the earliest times of contacting the archive and the studio, I was always amazed just how immediate the response would be, and how accommodating everybody was, including the artist himself. So it's extraordinary to have, at this sort of a distance, often from Australia we don't necessarily expect that sort of immediate assistance, but it's always been the case with all my dealings with both yourself and the archive and with the studio, which is wonderful.
So what is the second column of our duties, so like helping others with exhibition? I always say we're a helper, yeah, so we try to help others to do what their projects are. Yeah. And Dietmar described earlier that he'd helped us a little with our exhibition, which is an extraordinary understatement. He's helped us enormously from the very beginning, and there are works in our exhibition that would literally not be there if it were not for his advocacy for the exhibition. So we're enormously grateful for him, for his assistance on so many levels. So not a little bit, a lot. One thing where we can help always is with that we, due to our Catalog Resonate project, we have a lot of contact to private collectors, and we know the addresses of private collectors. So if a work is requested for an exhibition, we mostly can help with a contact to the private collector.
Yes, and that's what you've done so many times for us, and so very, very effectively on our behalf. So that's been really wonderful. There's a lot of Gerhard Richter work in private collections, and of course they're much harder to identify, they're much harder to communicate with, and many of these people want to remain anonymous. So if it weren't for Dietmar being our go-between, we simply would not get to ask the question, let alone to secure the loan. So very important to us. But I know you have some other objects from the archive that you're wanting to share with the audience, so perhaps before we move to questions, if you just wanted to...
Okay, yes, we can show three other images. And so this is when we started. We do not want to have works, so because they're also high in prices, we cannot really afford them, and we were happy that we only have to buy ephemera or prints, and so the prices were
relatively low.
Relatively low, so like 3,000. We spent 5,000. This was available for us, and we always had enough money to stand also against other private, mostly against other private interests. But then we bought one painting, and Gerhard later also donated to the studio for the archive. So we have a small collection now, and this is a group of 20 paintings that were gone away. Nobody knows where they are. Even Gerhard doesn't know where they are. And like 30 years later, from the early 70s, and like maybe 5 years ago, they showed up. And we have a legal. We have a legal discussion with the people who had them in their hands. I would not say who owns them. And we had a compromise at the end, so we got this group of 20 and another painting, and they got something. So, and this went to this archive, and is one of our most biggest acquisitions in paintings. And it's now, at the moment, it's for 2 years in the Kunstmuseum in Basel as a long-term loan from us to them. And this is something I found in the studio. It's a plan for the exhibition at the Biennial in Venice in 1972, where Richter is drawing. He has sketched the rooms and has drawn in small size all the paintings that were shown there. And it's an original drawing of the paintings. And it was near to being thrown away. So we saved it. With the assistants first took it away and said, "Oh, is this nothing for the archive?" So we saved it, and it's one of our most recent and most beloved acquisitions that we have this now. I've never saw it before I got it, even though I was working for him as a secretary also, but
at the time.
I don't know where it has for 30 years. So this is, he's now building these models, but at that time it was a flat drawing, and all the works here are hand painted in like in this scale.
Yeah.
And this is the 3 first volumes of the catalog Raisonné. So we published volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, and then this year volume 2, because it was more difficult this period, so we postponed it a little bit. So we came out on 4th, only with the 2nd volume, and we're working on volume 5 now at the moment.
And when do you anticipate that you'll get to the end of that project?
No, we publish every 2 years. Up till now, it was every 2 years, so it's like 17, 19, 21, and then the 7th one, 23.
Well, I'll just ask one question that perhaps will help to open up the discussion to the audience, and that's the question of how it is you've managed to stay interested and connected to the work of a single artist over this period of time, given that you've been had some sort of connection with Gerhard Richter since the 1980s, and ever since then, really, that connection has increased and become more and more focused. So I'm curious about how you've maintained that interest, and how you feel about the artist today, and in terms of that long history of your connection. If you can just give us some insight.
Yeah, he was always one of my favorite artists since I started to be interested in contemporary art. So my interest started with Salvador Dali, which was at that period very common in the 70s. But then I changed to more contemporary art. I was always also painting by myself when I was like 15, 17. And I met him in 1980. And I did an exhibition on his landscape paintings in the mid-90s. And I was his secretary in 84, 85. So I always had a contact. I wrote this biography later for his 70th birthday in 2002. And then he asked me if I could imagine to do this archive. And I really had the feeling that I want to do something different. And it was a challenge, and it was very... it was for me. It was very promising to come closer to him again and work for him and work with him and work about him, and to have this close relationship. And when I thought about it, always to imagine what that means to be so close to an artist of that status. I always think about it's like having the access to Pablo Picasso during the 50s or early 60s. So it's for me, it's something like that. and it makes it more clear for me what it means to have this position and this opportunity to be so close to an artist of this quality and range.
That's a wonderful and I think very fitting comparison. And a very good point for us to ask if there are questions from the floor. Dietmar's very happy to answer your questions either about the archive or about his knowledge of Gerhard Richter's work or of Gerhard Richter himself. There's a microphone that is available to you, so if you do have a question, can I ask you to pause until it comes to you? And yes.
With regard to the catalogue raisonné, I was wondering if you had a sense perhaps of the percentage of artworks, paintings and works on paper that may not have been presented for inclusion in the catalogue raisonné or authentication at this point.
This is the catalogue raisonné is the catalogue raisonné as it is also described in it in the introduction of the numbered works. He has a group of works which are mostly but not exclusively the paintings and the sculptures. There are also other works in it. And he gave them a number. He started in the late 60s to number them. So in this exhibition, the paintings are all numbered and there are overpainted photographs. This is something different. So it's the work of the mostly paintings and sculptures, but it's the work of catalogue of the numbered works. So the works he gave a number to. There are other works that do not have a number, like oil on paper, watercolors, overpainted photographs, pencil drawings. Some of them have their own catalogue raisonnés, like the drawings have an own catalogue raisonné, and the works in editions have an own catalogue raisonné. Sometimes it overlaps. Works that are in the edition catalogue raisonné are also in my catalogue raisonné because he also gave them a painting number, so a regular number. And also some works in the drawing catalogue raisonné have this type of number which I'm dealing with. So they are also in my catalogue raisonné. Then there are works existing that are paintings on small paintings on wood, maybe, or other small paintings on canvas, regular canvas, but never received a number because they are too small, or he gave them away as a present, a Christmas present to assistants or something like that.
So sorry, then with the numbering system, has that made it easier for the Richter archives to, as far as authentication goes, compared to, say, the art world has lost the authentication committees of Andy Warhol, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Keith Haring in recent times due to litigation and protecting against litigation. So perhaps is that why is it perhaps easier, or is it becoming still more difficult?
For him, first, he did it because it was easier to identify his works. Yeah, so he could write down the number, and was easy to identify the works instead of having a lot of works that are all called gray, yeah, or abstract painting, yeah. So it was the numbering system was easy to deal with his works, and for us it's for the catalogue raisonné is an advantage that we do not miss works. Yeah, we know about works that they are there or at least had been there. Might be some of them are also destroyed, but it's easy to not miss 100 paintings or so. But we have the numbering system; they are all listed, and so it's easy to not miss anything. There are also some works that missed a number, I would say. Yeah, he gave them very quickly out of his studio and gave them a number. Or and then if it's a substantial work, we would say it's not like a gift or something. It's not a sub-quality work, and we talk to him about it. So this has no number. It's a 2x2 meter abstract work or so, but you forgot to give him a number. So want to now give him give this painting a number. And sometimes he does, and there are other examples where he does not give it a number.
Certainly the numbering
He did not
system's
give
been
it a
very
number when it was painted, and he does not give it a number now after 30 years, because for different reasons, it was maybe not a substantial work that he just gave away to a friend. It was something that somebody took out of the garbage. It was never projected as a painting in its own. Think other reasons might be. And there are other works that do not have a number because they would be in a different catalog raisonné. Sometimes you cannot, with the works with pencil on canvas or so, sometimes you could not really decide if it's. There are works in our catalog raisonné where and there are others that are not, where you cannot really say why is this in and this not. That's also a fact. But it's his decision about the numbers, and we follow his decision.
We're getting tight on our time, so apologies for cutting you off a little there, but are there any more questions? Some at the back? Thanks very much for waiting until the mic comes.
In the colour is so light-filled and often a complex painting. I'm just thinking about an 85-year-old person. Does he have great clarity of sight and physical strength that he can attack such monumental work still?
It's he's just recently he did again some works that has large sizes again, because it's very difficult and hard to really produce these paintings, because it's the process of making them needs a lot of power,
Physical strength.
physical strength.
Yeah.
And before I was thinking the paintings were all small and mid-sized, so I thought he slows down a little bit. But the last ones that are in the studio now are big paintings again, so he still has this physical strength to produce these works. And I don't know, are you showing the film also, painting?
Yes.
Yes, if you see the film, Gerhard Richter painting, you see how much power he needs to put this stretcher,
the squeegee over the stretcher?
squeegee over the canvas with all these paint gluing on it.
Yeah. It really is quite a labour of painting with those large works. You're quite right to identify that, I think, as being an issue for somebody who's 85.
And I know that sometimes an assistant needed two persons to even put the squeegee over the canvas.
We probably have room for one quick question if there's one left. Otherwise, I'll need to thank Dr. Elger very much for his time and for his insight into the archive. We've enjoyed having him here as our guest, and particularly will enjoy hearing his thoughts tomorrow at this symposium as well. And thank you all for coming this morning.
Thank you very much.